There we go. All right. So what's up, guys? I have Kahil here from the Locked On Pistons podcast. Again, links for all these creators are going to be in the description. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Let us know what you love about your Pistons and what you talk about.
Yeah, so I'm the host of Locked On Pistons for the Locked On Network, Detroit Pistons sports podcast daily, all throughout the year, whether it's in season, out of season, cover them every single day. Um, yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm happy to be covering the team. I'm happy to have a following and have a good community to talk with Pistons about. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. So the first question I've just asked about everybody when I've had on is what to you is considered a successful season for your Pistons? What is success for you guys?
I think a successful season for the Detroit Pistons would be I think they would want to hit their over this year, which has been set at 24 and a half. I don't think they've
Okay.
hit their over in like the last 5 years. So simply hitting the over, I think would be a positive season. I think they obviously want to avoid being the worst team in the NBA again. They probably don't want to be bottom three in the league again. They want to be playing competitive games in February. Now, whether that translates to an actual play-in spot, who knows? But simply playing games that matter. You don't want to be resting players in March and then April again because of injuries that aren't really
Right.
there because you're tanking. You don't want that to be the case. Whether you end up actually in the play-in or not, you want to be actually playing games that matter. So I think that would be their goal. I don't think they would put an exact number on their win total, but I think that is what they're aiming for. They want to be playing games that actually matter at the end of the season and not resting guys 2 months early.
Okay. Okay. And then I was going to ask you too. So Cade Cunningham obviously is your guys' like centerpiece, your guy of the franchise future. You just extended him. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about your building around Cade, just in terms of the pieces and how they fit and everything. I'm just curious, I guess, from your perspective as someone who watches way more Pistons game than me for sure. Cade's development and such. Do you think a part of the I don't know what the word be, the lack of resounding jump, or you know what I'm saying, like a superstar leap or something? How much of that do you pin on the team? And like not, because he's someone that works in space and you guys don't have a whole lot of space. Or how much do you pin that on? He's also just got to get a lot better versus, oh, our system has failed him kind of thing.
I think Cade was hurt a lot by the fact that he didn't play a second season. He only played
Mhm.
11 games the second season due to that shin injury. I think a lot of people forget that this past year was basically his second year. Other guys in his draft class have played 3 seasons worth of games, where Cade really just crossed a season's worth of games this year. He only played like 60 some games. His rookie year only played like 11 his second year. So he just crossed. I don't think he's even crossed 2 years worth of games yet in his career. So I don't think people understand that too. I think Cade took a lot of big improvements this past year, especially with his jump shot. It looked a lot more like it people thought it would be coming out of Oklahoma State, um, especially from beyond the arc. Self creation wise, on dribble pull up threes as well. He was shooting really. I think he shot around 35% dribble pull up threes after the first 10 games of the year. So I think he took big jumps across the board. They just weren't really noticed because of the team he was on.
Mhm.
I think if the team was a little better, he's someone that would have made an all-star team. I think he was playing really well this year, it just wasn't noticed. So I do think a lot of it falls on the Pistons for not giving him a good enough team or putting not even just like great players, just simply players that fit around him for
Right.
him to really be able to lead the team where he could lead them. Um, the lack of spacing has been the biggest issue by far
Mhm.
for Cade Cunningham so far with the Pistons. It seems like they've tried to deal with that this offseason, but through 3 seasons, or really 2 years for him, but 3 years since being drafted, the Pistons have not gotten him spacing. They have not done a good job building a functional team, a functional lineup around him, and it's held him back in some regard. But I think despite that, this past season, the fact that he was able to have a season where he shot, I'm not looking at stats right now, but I believe around 44% from the field, 35% from deep, and around 85% from the free throw line. Having that type of a elite around a league average efficiency on the team he had, with the type of spacing he had, with the kind of focus he had, and the type of usage he had, the fact that he was able to have the improvements he did, I think speak even more volumes than the numbers do initially. So I think the team is, but also Cade has to improve in areas too. He has to become more explosive. I just talked
Mm.
with his brother and his trainer last week. I talked with his brother last summer. I talked with his trainer this past week. Explosiveness is something that they're really working on. That he knows that he has to get more explosive. He has to improve his finishing around the rim, which I think will come with more explosion and more space. Um, his stamina, so he doesn't drain himself out as the game goes on. He has energy for the fourth quarter. I think those are things he has to get better at, and he is working on. I know, and wants to get better at, and he will get better at. But I think the majority of it, I think a lot of people would put on the Pistons organization for not giving him a team that could really function around him.
Yeah, for sure. I was just curious because he's a guy that a lot of us talked about. It's very weird the Cade Cunningham conversations. They are so all over the place. Like have some people go to one extreme or go to the more logical or whatever of being like this team isn't necessarily building for him correctly, and
I would
he's
simply,
yeah.
I would
Go ahead.
simply say this. I'm going to say, look at all the other players in his draft class.
Mm,
Look at where they got drafted to and what their surrounding pieces are. Scotty Barnes goes to Toronto. He's still playing with pieces of a championship team that was left. You got Pascal, you got Kyle Lowry, you got OG Anunoby. He's playing with legit players that were playing 30 plus minutes for a championship team in 2019. That's where
mm,
he's going to playing with. Evan Mobley's playing with two elite top guards in Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, along with Jared Allen next to him. That's what he got drafted into. Franz Wagner is currently playing with a team that has Paolo Banchero and a team that has been built on on their size and defense. Wendell Carter Jr. They got good pieces over there in
mm,
Orlando. You look at all across where even Jalen Green hasn't worked out the best, but even look at Houston. Houston built a good, sound team this past year with veterans around them. Four guys, not just Jalen Green, but even the other guys. Like, look at all the other players that maybe more national people and more national fans think about when it comes to the 2021 draft class, and look at what their situations are and who they are playing with and what team has been built around them, and then compare that to what Cade's been given. And I think that shows a lot of why you don't hear more about him nationally.
No, for sure. I can for sure see where you're coming from on that. And that was the other thing I was going to ask you about. So you guys are obviously loaded up with young talent. Like, I don't know where you rank in terms of age, especially now that you got like Tobias and, guys like that. But what do you feel about, because obviously Jaden Ivey was a huge discussion point last season, especially because, I remember especially on Twitter, the blow up around why is Monty benching him and then starting him and then benching him again. And then like what's going on with his minutes? Like, can they play together? And then obviously you get Asar, and now you've drafted Ron Holland, right? So again, shooting is still a bit of a question. The defense, I can kind of see where you guys are trying to go with him in that way. So what do you feel like? What young pieces at this point should the Pistons be looking at and being like, this is what we need around Cade versus like, let's try and shop it while the value is there before it's too late and we're stuck with, you know what I mean?
I
Relative
think
to anyone else.
I think that's the question the front office is asking. It's been something I've talked about all offseason, is weighing the risk reward when it comes to the value. You want to capitalize on the value while it's there before it's gone. And even though Ivy and even a player like Duren didn't have the most impressive season, the farther you get away from the draft class, the more the mystique rubs off. The closer you are to the draft class, the mystique around the league is still there. Oh, that player was this pick. Oh, I had him on this board. I still think I can get this player out of him. I was really high on him. The farther you get away from that, the more that rubs off. So that is the question that they are going through in the front office of, does it make more sense to keep guys around and try to develop them, or do we need to call it when we see it and say, okay, this is time for us to get off it because it's only going to get worse. That's something that they're discussing. I think they've made the decision that they're going to give these guys at least to the deadline. It seems like when it comes to which players um, are long-term pieces, I think the cornerstones right now is Cade and Asar. I think that's who they have at the
Okay.
top. I think with Trajan making his first pick being Ron Holland, I think you obviously would then assume that Ron Holland is up
He's
there
going to
because
stick around. Yeah.
that's his first pick as the GM. Um, After that, I think everything's a question. I think Jane Ivey has a lot to answer this year and a lot to prove this year if he wants to remain past the deadline. I think the same thing with Jaylen Duren. Outside of that, I really think the only two, I think Cade's the only real untouchable I think the closest next one is Asar, and they're going to try to build around those guys and have spacing and get guys to fit with that. And they want to give Ivy and Duren the until the deadline to prove that they can be one of those guys they build with. If they can't, then I think they'll be moved. But I think that's where they're at right now.
Okay, I see. And I was actually going to ask you too. So, and clearly they're committed a little bit because I know you guys got the trainer that helped fix, Lonzo's jumper, and that's been like
Fred
a
Vincent.
huge. Yep. I'm sure. Have you heard a lot about how that's been going for the team and stuff? Because you seem, super in touch. So, what's that been sort of going like for the Pistons?
So Fred Vincent, I've said multiple times in my podcast that Fred Vincent is maybe the most important hiring in like Pistons history at this point. Like with the way they're like marketing it, like with the way they're talking about how important Fred Vincent is. Like the Pistons didn't need to make any trades or signings because getting Fred Vincent was like getting LeBron apparently in the 2011 free agency. Like that's what it's been made out to be. I know Fred Vincent as recently as last week. I was talking with someone was working every day with Asar Thompson already. I know that he's at the Pistons practice facility nonstop working with the guys. I know for a fact Asar is one of those guys that he's been working with consistently so far. I'm sure there's some other guys he's been working with. But all I've heard ever since they made the hiring was just how important Fred Vincent is to the Pistons. I think his hiring was more important than JB Bickerstaff. I'm not that's not actually a joke. I think that actually that's how the organization feels. That if this team's going to get to where they want to get to and want to improve, like they need Fred Vincent to deliver like that magic that everyone believes he has when it comes to teaching shooting.
Yeah, for sure. That is so interesting. I never knew that you guys were super high on pushing him as the. And that's the other question too. What you guys got JB Bickerstaff, right? So you move off of Monty, which I to some extent can understand because you just the optics of last year are crazy on paper, and you got the new GM and stuff. So you want your guys in your organization. Do you like the JB Bickerstaff acquiring, and like what do you think he's going to bring for you guys in terms of like a culture and identity? Like what do you think he's going to provide for you?
I think with JB Bickerstaff, I think before they hired him, I think everyone, a majority of the fan base, I think wanted a young and up and coming coach that hadn't been given an opportunity yet, an assistant coach that could grow with the team, an offensive guru kind of coach. I think that's what a lot of people wanted. Guys that come to my mind, maybe a Sean Sweeney, maybe Chris Quinn out of Miami, guys like that. Um, but they went with JB Bickerstaff. And I think that JB Bickerstaff, one of the big things about him that's going to be his selling point is his ability to create a foundation with your team. You go back to what Cleveland was when he was hired, he steadily improved them each year and he helped create a foundation. No matter how it ended, he was part of the creating of that pouring that cement and really building a foundation with Cleveland to where they were no longer a laughing stock. They were a competitive team and they turned that culture around. So I think that's the biggest selling point with JB Bickerstaff. As outside of that, I think defensively, he's going to help. I think that's where he's going to hang his hat, is helping a lot on defense and trying to get the most defensively out of the players. Me personally, I'm more in a wait and see with him. We'll see how it goes. He would not have been my first choice, maybe not even my second choice, but I understand the hiring. I get why they did it. He said all the right things so far. So we'll see how it goes. He's not a bum of a coach at all. I can see how it could work out, but I could also see how it doesn't work out. So, it's more of a wait and see approach that I have with it right now.
No, yeah, for sure. I can understand that. I think him getting fired in the first place was a little odd to me to begin with because, I mean, they ran into a far superior team, like not even remotely close with Boston. I don't know what you expected him to, be able to, turn out there. I don't know. That to me is sometimes where I'm like, well, what could he have done? So I guess I'm curious. And so is Kenny Atkinson a big name for you that you would have tried to go for? Because he ended up going to Cleveland. So is that who you were hoping? Like, hey,
Kenny would have been a cool name. I don't think Kenny was ever in the running or ever being considered by the
mhm,
Pistons, but he is a cool. He definitely I think would fit with what a lot of people would want in Detroit. I just don't think anyone really mentioned him or thought about him because everyone relatively knew it wasn't an option. So I think
okay.
I really like Kenny as a coach. I just don't think he was ever an option for the Pistons.
And then did you like you guys got a bunch of vets this season for you guys? Well, I guess you brought back Tobias after a long time. You got big ball, Paul Reed. I actually like that move a lot by you guys. Malik Beasley, you bring. Like, what do you think about these vets that you guys are bringing in? Like, were you a fan of them? Or were you like, hey, where are we trying to go with this? Like, what do you think?
I think they really wanted to acquire spacing, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Trajan made it a point to get spacing in Tobias, Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., re-signing Simone Fontecchio. I think they've really made it a point to get spacing at those wing positions, those off-ball positions, which is badly needed for this team. I believe they were like 29th in the league in three-point attempts and like 28th in the league in three-point percentage. So they desperately needed spacing. They also wanted some veterans in the locker room that could actually lead the team and create a stable environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why they brought back Tobias, is because he's one of those vets that actually want to be in Detroit. And it's different between having a vet that is here but doesn't necessarily want to be here. And it kind of affects the locker room and affects the type of leadership you get. Whereas you have a veteran that actually wants to be here and can lead by example by actually playing well. Outside of having a vet that can't really show you what they're saying anymore because they can't play anymore. Tobias can still play. He's a really good player, and he wants to be here. So I think that was a big reason why they went after Tobias. But I think the biggest takeaway is they just wanted shooting, and they went and got that.
Okay. Yeah, I can for sure see that. I was going to ask you too, what do you think of guys like Isaiah Stewart? Because at this point, they've sort of fallen to the wayside in conversations and stuff. But I actually grew up with him way back, way back. So it was kind of cool seeing him fight LeBron. I'm not going to lie. That was a moment that everyone at home, we were all posted about it on Instagram for like a week. But what do you think of guys like, Isaiah Stewart, or kind of just like floating around on the team still? And you're like, are you still going to be here? Are we moving? Are we chilling? Like, what are we, where are we going with this?
The talk around Isaiah Stewart is always going to be um, interesting until they make a decision on what they want to do with him, because he's a good player, he's a viable player, he's going to play no matter what. It's just a matter of, are you going to play him at what a lot of people believe is his best position, which is the backup five, or are you
Mhm.
going to continue to try to play him as a four? If you're going to continue to play him as a four, I think people would speculate that you're probably going to end up moving him. If you're going to play him as the backup five, I think a lot of people would rather you keep him because he is really valuable at the five position. As a stretch big at the five, he's a better. He's going to be able to attack fives off the dribble on closeouts than he is fours doing that. He's not going to be able to do that. He's not very fluid. He's not very flexible.
Mm.
So, and it's a lot of awkwardness with that, but he's able to do it against fives. He's also his biggest superpower is the fact that he's switchable on defense, and that's something that you really want out of your five. Having a switchable four is kind of like, okay, that's what everyone does. You need to like
Right.
everyone should be a switchable. But at the five, that's when it really becomes valuable. So if they're going to continue to play him as the backup four, that would be a little concerning. Playing with the backup five, I think, would be really valuable and where everyone really would like to see him at. I also am aware that he is. A lot of people are aware that he is one of the more sought after players on the roster with the most value that teams want, that people want to trade for. So he could be a part of a trade that gets them future assets, or maybe a part of a
Mm.
bigger trade that gets them a bigger name player. That could happen too. But I don't necessarily think that he's fallen by the wayside. I think they just recognize his value, and his value. I think he's probably one of the only players on the team outside of Cade that has value to the team and to the rest of the NBA, to where he can play, but you can also move him in a deal and get good value for. So he's more flexible in that regard than you would say maybe an Ivy at this point.
Interesting. Okay. And I was going to ask you too, because I've seen you on Twitter and stuff. You seem super tapped in with your community and stuff like that. What is a take or a stance that the fans of the Pistons have taken that has made you sit there and look to the side and go, what the hell are these guys talking about, man? What are we doing here?
So like the fan base or like the actual organization made a decision that I did not agree
Oh,
with?
I mean, let's just try. We could do both, but we can start with the fan base. Let's start with the fan base. What is the fan base that made you go, what are we doing, guys?
I think one of the things that I disagree with in the fan base, I, I don't know. I don't look at them like what the hell are we thinking. It's more so I just disagree.
Mm.
I'm ready to move on from Ivy right now. I'm ready to move on and get the value you can right now, because I just don't think him and Cade are the best fit. And I think the possibility of playing him this year off the bench in limited minutes will only decrease his value than it already is. So you might get the most that you can now. That's where I'm at. Some people would argue against me and say playing him this year would do nothing than raise his value. I disagree. I get that it could raise his value, but I also think there's a future where it could decrease his value as well. And now you're selling even worse than you would be now. And I think that's more so because I'm just more out on him as a player than everyone else. If you still believe in him, I get why you'd want to hold on to him. And a lot of the fans still believe in him. I'm more so just out on him as a player, so I'd rather recoup the assets now. So I think that's probably the biggest disagreement that I have within the fan base as of right now, is our stances are different concerning Jay and Ivy.
Okay. And I was going to ask you too. So when you guys traded Bojan last year, what did you think of the return, especially, considering the speculated return for him at the time? Beforehand was like multiple firsts, like, and again, you're more in touch than I am, so you could probably sit here and tell me no, answer that's BS. There was never any first rounders, whatever. But like, what do you think of that return? I guess.
I think Troy Weaver, it's been notable, was not good at all with asset management. So
Mm.
he had a lot of deals previously for more players than just Boyan, guys like Alec Burks, Jeremy Grant. He had previous offers of higher value, and at other times that he didn't capitalize on. He often held on to players too long, and then you ended up moving off them at worse value. So I do think that is true, that they could have got a better deal for Boyan previously than that. But they took the best deal at that time.
Right.
I think that deal is an objective failure now that they moved on from Quentin Grimes, because Quentin Grimes was like the big asset in that deal.
Right.
And now they just basically moved him for an expiring and second round picks. So I think that now has 100% been a big failure of a trade by the Pistons, because Bojan and Burks were really their only asset players they had at the time, and all they turned them into was Malachi Flynn, a few seconds, and Quentin Grimes, who was supposed to be the first round pick that the Pistons eventually ended up moving on from 2 months later after 8 games played, for some seconds and expiring. So there was better deals at previous times. Troy Weaver was not very, I wouldn't say he was very good at asset management. It's probably one of the biggest reasons why he's gone.
Mm.
But it is what it is.
No. Okay. I see. Okay. Yeah, for sure. And then I was going to ask you as well, what could be considered a failure for this team? Like, what is like a failure of a season? Now, obviously, you could go as simple as like, oh, we're the worst again, and we end up at pick 5 or 6 again somehow. But I guess I'm looking at like, what to you, aside from a record, would be a failure for this team?
I think a failure for this team would be if no players took any meaningful steps forward,
Mm.
and you were forced to move off a lot of guys. I think that would be the biggest failure. I'm not Obviously the biggest failure would be Cade coming out and looking terrible, but I don't think that's realistic. I think Cade's gonna come out and look good. He looked good last year despite the team records. I don't suspect he's just gonna be bad. So
Mm.
that's not gonna happen. Within realistic bounds, Ivy doesn't take a step forward. Duren doesn't take a step forward. You don't win as many games because of it, and now you have to move off of them because they don't fit and they haven't taken steps forward. So now you're moving them at probably lower value than you'd like. You're also not winning very many games, and you're going to another offseason trying to fill positions that you hoped were already filled by young guys. I think that would be the biggest failure of the season. Um, I guess you could add on to that the veterans that you brought in don't make that big of an impact. A guy like THJ doesn't play well. He looks more like the guy in the second half of last season than he did in the first half. A
Mm.
guy like Malik Beasley drops off. A guy like Tobias drops off. Like that would be the worst case scenario for the Pistons, and would have them, I think, in a panic. I think this past year was a bit of a panic. Obviously, you had the worst team in the league and the worst record in franchise history, but I think this offseason they kind of tried to remain in the be patient, and we're going to try and make moves on the outer skirts by not moving off many of the young guys and just getting veterans. They tried to calm those noises a little bit, which I think they were okay at doing. But if guys don't make a step forward next season again, then like panic button is being pressed, and you probably don't want that to be the case. So I think that would be the biggest failure.
Mm. Okay. I could see that for sure. And I guess I'm curious, are you, because you said you're more so off of Ivy as a player. Are you the same way with Jaylen Duren, or are you still like kind of solid with him? You just think he's gotta take those steps a little bit?
I think Jaylen Duren, I just recorded about this on my podcast. Jaylen Duren, I think there's a clearer pathway to Jaylen Duren remaining on this team moving forward because the differences between Duren and Ivy is this. So like Ivy, the idea of Ivy, I think, is better than Ivy itself. Like Ivy is not a good finisher yet, despite his athleticism. He was one of the worst finishers in the league this past year. Um, he wasn't a very good finisher. He's not a very good shooter. He doesn't have a very good in between game either. He's a bad decision maker and he's a reckless passer. Along with that, he's a bit undersized, not terribly, but a bit undersized at the position, and he doesn't play defense. So, like all of that combined, it's just like you're asking for a lot of steps in multiple areas to reach productive NBA player level. Like you need him to get better as a finisher. You need him to make better decisions. You need him to become a better outside shooter. You need him to become better defensively. You need him to become a better, I don't know if I said it right, but a better decision maker. Like those are all things you need from him before he becomes a good player. I think you're asking a lot of different steps to be taken in one offseason. I just don't know if that's realistic. Whereas Duren, all Duren needs to do is show that he's making progress defensively because offensively, he's there. Offensively, he has a real skill finishing around the basket as a lob threat, as a screener. He's a really good playmaker for his size. He operates out of the DHO at the high post area a lot. He's able to take guys off the dribble from the high post area and finish at the rim. He dunks on, if he has a chance to dunk on you, he's going to dunk on you. Like he's improved his footwork in the post. He abuses mismatches. Like he can do all, and he's shot nearly 80% from the free throw line this year after shooting 62% at Memphis and 62% his rookie year. So he's offensively, he's there. Like he's improving. You see everything you want offensively.
Right.
Just defensively, he was horrendous and he's been terrible. And he's not a versatile defender either, where he can play drop, switch, hedge at the level. Like he needs to be a drop big. So he's not a versatile big defensively, and he's not a good defensive big even in that one area. So if Duren simply improves at understanding drop angles and being more active around the rim and blocking more shots, contesting more shots, being locked in more defensively, that's a very clear pathway to being an immediate center of the future because he's just a seamless fit with Cade offensively. Ivy, I just feel like Ivy has a lot more you need from him to make it work than it is Duren. I feel like Duren, you just need him to improve defensively and show he's taken steps, and you're like, okay, that's our guy. Ivy, I think there's just a lot more things he has to do.
No, yeah. I mean, that's totally fair. I was just curious because, again, two totally different players. And obviously, I think if you ask the general public, and I agree with you to the extent of like, where he was drafted and stuff. So I think a lot of people are still higher on Ivy and the upside of Ivy and like, oh, well, he can still be, X, Y, or Z. It's just, he's on the Pistons or whatever you want to say. But because I actually did make a video, like, I think it was midway through his rookie season on Jaylen Duren, because I was like, I liked his game a lot. And I was going to ask you, do you think he's someone who benefits on like, because now you're bringing in, you still have Asar, incredible defender. Ron Holland, if he pans out defensively like he's supposed to, already a good defender there. Cade, I don't think is a slouch. But again, when you're on a team sometimes where you're that bad, obviously mentally at times you're like, why am I doing this right now? Like, do you think like the perimeter defense shoring up might help Duren actually like improve at that point? Or like, is it just one of those things he has to work on it and everything else can kind of fall into place? And you know what I mean?
I think it's both. His effort 100% has to improve a ton.
Mm-hmm.
He lacks a lot of effort defensively. He lacks a lot of focus. A lot of times it just feels like he's coasting out there defensively. I don't want to say he just doesn't care defensively because that's a big claim to make, but oftentimes you feel that way watching him defensively. And then when you get on offense, all of a sudden he's ready to really show his bag, which he has. He's good offensively, but like you clearly see that watching him that he cares more about one end than the other right now. So I think he has to improve in a multiple, and he's really young. It's hard for young bigs to be good defensively. So hopefully with more reps and experience, like he's able to improve somewhat, even though most young bigs, even though if they're not good, you see the flashes that, okay, we see what he can be. Like, I think an often comparison he gets is Andre Drummond, who was another young 18-year-old center for the Pistons. And at the time of his age, Andre wasn't good defensively, but he was averaging like a steal a game. You could quickly see he had very quick hands, active hands. He was averaging like a block and a half a game his rookie season, active around the rim. He went after shots. Like, you saw, okay, there's something to build there. You're seeing the flashes. Duren, you're just not even seeing the flashes, really. There was like a 3-game spurt at the beginning of last season where he was good defensively. And then outside of that, every other game, it's just been bad. So that's the concerning part. So I think he has to improve a ton himself. But then the other thing is those first 3 games did happen with Killian Hayes, who was a good defender, Asar Thompson, who was a good defender, and Stu, who's a good defender, all playing with him. So one could make the argument, okay, if you put better defenders around him, he will be better defensively. And I could see that argument too, which I think points to another reason to believe there's a clearer pathway for Duren to get to where you need him to be than an Ivy. So I think it's both. But I think it's definitely more so he has to improve. I think you can scheme around it a little bit more and make it easier on him with defenders, though.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, man, we're about to head out of here. So I really, first of all, wanted to thank you for being a part of this project. Like, it really means a lot to me. So I want you to go ahead, if you have anything to say to the viewers before we head out of here. Again, guys, links to his pod will be in the description, of course, posted on Twitter, all that. So go ahead and let the viewers, I guess, know whatever you want to know.
Yeah, you can follow me over on Twitter at Kukahill. You can also follow me, obviously, my podcast, Locked On Pistons for the Locked On Network. Daily Pistons podcast, cover them all season. Not just all season, all year round. If you're not already following, again, like I said, follow, hit that subscribe on the YouTube channel. That's really, I appreciate you having me on.
No, of course. Thank you so much, man. Really, it means everything. So thank you.